And without further ado, I'm going to invite Catalina Jaime, the head of the Secretariat of REAP, Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, to make her presentation that is titled From AI to Impact, Building the Partnerships, Policies, and Finances Needed to Scale Heat Early Warning and Early Action. So it's a pleasure to have Catalina with us. I'm sure that she's going to also make a very impactful and interesting presentation. And I give you the floor, Catalina.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Walter, as well for the invitation. When I heard, what was the title of the conference and, all the work that you have been doing, I thought, okay, this is wonderful. I really want to be here because I think it's just, we really need to get all together from all different perspectives to tackle these massive challenges that we have. So just to get started, REAP, the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, is like the largest network of governments, organizations that are working on the topic of advancing early warning systems and anticipatory action. So one of the things that I want to do is to take you a little bit through the history of early warning systems and anticipatory action, talk a little bit about the gaps that we have and really looking at the way forward. Because I really believe that if we want to make the best use of AI, and if we want to really make sure that we set up the early warning systems and anticipatory action processes for heat, we need to learn from history. Like we need to understand where are we coming from, what had happened, to really know exactly how do we move forward. I love the presentation from Dr. Bajaj because he clearly showed this beautiful timeline of India, particularly Odisha, of all the years that you have been working on this. This is not new. We have been working on this for so many years. We need to build on this process. One of the reasons why I fully believe, and I think all of us here, that really believe that we need to absolutely put in place these early warning systems is because they are really not optional. They are absolutely existential if we really consider what the future will be under, climate change. Like putting my IPCC hat, we're really looking into what is going to be the world under, an overshoot period, the next 100 years where, we cross the 1.5. What are all these kind of like different unprecedented events that we're going to experience, which we're getting already a taste of it. Like only if you are the ones that are in Europe, there was a heat wave or a series of heat waves that just happened in the last weeks with, like, in the UK, the government announced a couple of days ago that around like 2,700 people die because of this. So this is like the tip of the iceberg of what we potentially want to see in the future. So again, this idea of really having an early warning system and an anticipatory action process as part of this wider disaster risk reduction process is non-negotiable. Like we need to have it. Okay, so let me get started a little bit with the history because I get very excited. After so many years working on this topic, I just feel that we really need to. This is not new. Like when a lot of people get into this topic thinking that anticipatory action or an early warning systems is just, the recent topic. It's like, no. We have been doing this. I mean, like humans have been actually kind of using warnings for like centuries. In recent history, and I would say like the last 50 years have been absolutely essential. In a way, from a kind of tragic perspective, like the reason why early warning systems have evolved in the last 50 years is normally because we had really bad disasters. Like the 70s was a very critical period. Bangladesh had a massive disaster. Of course, we had the tsunami with like 250,000 people that died. That really shake up the system. That kind of said to the system, well, we cannot just wait for the disaster to happen. We need to do something. So there were some very important political process that happening not only at country level, but kind of at global and regional level. So we had like the biggest kind of like super important conferences that brought all the countries together on this topic in 1998. It was the first ever conference on early warning system. I'm pretty sure, Ricardo, you know that history, like very, very well. Then another conference in 2003. Of course, in 2006, there was another big moment of this. And of course, the key political milestones that I think we need to highlight, because it's where the government said, yes, we need to prioritize this topic was like clearly Hyogo, and of course ratified with Sendai, where the government said, yeah, we are going to have an indicator on making sure that multi-hazard early warning systems are in place in the countries. The question mark is that, of course, we are not getting there, no? And I want to get to that point very soon. Now, from a financing perspective, there was a big recognition that early warning system needed to be funded, that there was a need of making sure that we have actually the financing to set up this system. So during the COP in Paris, the first and kind of like the most important fund for early warning systems was created, called CRUS, the Climate Risk Early Warning Systems Initiative, which is brilliant. It's like this kind of fund that support the implementing partners on advancing particularly historically in the last few years, kind of the early warning part, but is now kind of moving into also funding the early action kind of element. Something that is important to highlight, and I think related as well with the presentations that happened before, is that there has been a remarkable amount of research in the last years, which is fantastic. Like you have, for instance, networks like the Peri network in Africa with like 23 universities that within their disaster risk reduction kind of work, they have the topic of early warning systems. And if we see on the type of research that is starting to finally advance, heat waves are definitely one of these very important kind of emerging research agendas in the horizon. And of course, we have like global programs on research that have really, in a way, transformed not only how kind of like forecasts are produced, but how they can be understood. And I am pretty sure, like Kamal in his presentation, at the very beginning, highlighted this very important political milestone, which is the early warning for all. Like the early warning for all has elevated politically this agenda and say like, well, as a Secretary General, the Guterres, like really took the leadership of this topic and say, okay, we need to make sure that everybody is protected with early warning. This is a priority, and that has been a massive important shift in this agenda. Now, from an AI perspective, the last year and a half has been absolutely incredible. So one of the examples that I get very, very excited about is what ECMWF is doing, which is really looking or reshaping the way how they do forecast with a massive investment in AI. And what is very interesting and very important for all of us to understand is that those investments on AI, they are not only important for the context of like Europe, but they are trying really to expand and become like a public good for other geographies. Like there is a beautiful example at the moment in Malawi of how the Malawi Med Service is working with ECMWF and the Norwegian Med Service to make sure that all those advanced online AI are actually supporting the weather forecasting in Malawi. And that's just the beginning of a massive transformation in this work. And there are other really fantastic examples from REAP partners. One of those is Resurgence, who is looking at the use of AI from an early warning perspective, particularly with a focus on IDP camps and like the most vulnerable populations. So there was recently a very important conference, the AI for Good conference, like many of the REAP partners really highlighted, like the key momentum, that we have on this agenda. And so we definitely see the momentum of what is happening. Now, I'm going to make a little break here because I think this is also very, very relevant. As part of this history, of course, the governments have been at the forefront of this transformation of early warning systems. But within the humanitarian sector, there was something very, very powerful that had happened over the last 15 years. At a certain point, the humanitarian sector said, well, shall we just continue responding to disasters, or can we become more anticipatory? Can we really use weather forecasting in a better way? And there was this big question mark of okay, how can we actually set up the systems to make sure that an early warning translates into early action? And there were really three important things that were created in the humanitarian sector to enable that, which is one of those was creating a financing mechanism, which has been always the complex part of an early warning system. Like if you don't necessarily have the money to be able to do the early action, you can have a great plan, but then what do you do with it? So the creation of these financing mechanisms that can be triggered automatically based on a forecast and a risk analysis is extremely powerful. So in the last basically decade, those financing mechanisms have been created. Of course, they are attached with an enhanced decision-making process. So it's not only about having the forecast, no, but it's also to know about like, and what happened if these forecasts really materialize? Who is likely to be impacted? How? Why? So this has been like a super critical transformation in the humanitarian sector, with like a lot of like support from the very beginning. I was part of the beginning of this history, so I get very passionate about it because it's just so wonderful to see, you know, how the different pieces come together, with like the German government really taking a big leadership, organizations like WFP, FAO, Star Network, and of course the Red Cross and Red Crescent. So there has been this incredible transformation in the history. Now, connecting the dots in terms of like that history of evolution of early warning systems, plus this very interesting development of anticipatory action, the question is like, okay, what is the next? What do we need to do next? And one of the key, very important things is basically we need to ensure that every single government in the world has an early warning system and an anticipatory action process that functions, that works. The problem is that we still have really serious gaps to be able to get to that point. So I'm going to highlight what are the key like gaps that we have in this moment in the system and how we can tackle. Because again, we're looking at how can we ensure that we have early warning systems and anticipatory actions for heat waves, and that we can make the best use of AI. We need to kind of tackle these very specific gaps. So some of those include lack of observations in so many places in the world. Like even my PhD was about early warning and early action in conflict settings. Many conflict settings do not have the data, do not have the processes, no? So there is this big question mark, like how can we support those very specific vulnerable populations? Then from a heat wave perspective, there is a gap still on understanding, and research is one of the most under-researched hazards. So we need to have a massive work of understanding the impacts, the solutions for different geographies, for different type of populations. No? So this is like absolutely like critical. And there is a very important thing, which is the gap on legislation. Because if we're talking about having really these systems embedded within governmental systems, we need to have those kind of legal aspects of early warning systems, not only within disaster risk management, but within the ministers of health, within the ministers of finance, within like across all the spectrum. So there is still a massive, massive gap. So if we look at from a historical perspective, we have a wonderful evolution, so many kind of learnings. We know how to do it. Like we know how to do an early warning system and an anticipatory action process. This is not like, let's test this. No, we know it. The question is, how do we make sure that all that knowledge that we have built historically gets actually embedded within the governmental systems, and learning from the beautiful examples like the one that Dr. Bajaj was sharing with us earlier, like how that gets really into the systems. Now, from a future perspective, and I'm going to concentrate mostly on the role of like networks and partnerships, and like why actually working together is just not optional. Again, it brings back the point of like, we have worked on this for many years. The way forward is to work together. Like we need to make sure that these coalitions, these partnerships, this connecting kind of tissue, between all these partners kind of come together. And that's like one of the reasons why I am actually very excited about the role of REAP within this process. Because like the REAP strategy for the next 5 years, which is really centered around, what all these different governments and partners really want to focus on, are really like 3 very specific things. One is related to sense making. Like there is so much out there. Like we have like financial flows, investments going in different directions. We have like a lot of research, like so much going on. And there is this need of like really connecting the opportunities, really making sense of the ecosystem. And then there are 2 key priorities, what are policy and financing. So policy, it's really what I was saying before, like we need that change on those governmental systems. So we need to do that together, like as coalition. We cannot just necessarily doing it as individual governments, as individual institutions, but the need of that kind of coalition thinking to change that policy process is super essential. And then the financing element, which is not a mystery. We need every single government to have a financing mechanism to be able to develop the systems, maintain them, and be able to do the early action. And that requires a really deep work with the ministers of finance, with like different types of like ministries that they can embed these financing mechanisms. And they could be like a mosaic of options, like from the parametric insurance that we were talking about before, to a specific domestic funding streams, or even just flexibilities to existing budget lines that enable the system actually to do the early action. So to finalize, the invitation is to, really looking forward, to talk to any of you interested, about this role of networks and partnerships in this process. I think in the context of AI, we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg of the possibilities that are ahead of us. So it's really that moment again from a partnership, from a network perspective, that we just build in each other's work, and then we just don't start to develop, AI solutions, isolated and without thinking of this history, but that is actually connected to that history and that is really built in partnerships. So with that, I'll pass over to you, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Catalina, very much. You have done a very passionate presentation, and I pretty much enjoyed a lot the way in which you brought us through the history of early warning systems. And I could refer a lot to it. So I started feeling old, but it's not your fault.